It's so easy to be average. It takes a little something to be special, doesn't it? It takes a little something special to be a great player. Did you push yourself to be great today?
Yeah. The man of Scarlet and Gray. Yeah. Let's go. The man of Scarlet and Gray. What we reading now? Who we listen to? Who we rockin' with hard? The man of Scarlet and Gray. Who we vibing with? Who we riding with? Who we clapping for love? The man of Scarlet and Gray. What we reading now? Who we listen to? Who we rockin' with hard? The man of Scarlet and Gray. Who we vibing with? Who we riding with? Who we clapping for love? The man of Scarlet and Gray. It's time for it. You ready for it? It's my time. You better know it. It's go Bucks. Every time. Hating on us, you better get
your undisputed source of all things Ohio State. This is the Men of the Scarlet and Gray podcast. Here's your hosts, Shannon Summers and Chip Minnich.
the man of Scarlet and Gray.
Buckeye Nation, welcome to another great edition of Men of Scarlet and Gray podcast here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V-Sporto channel, bringing you all Buckeyes all the time. I'm your host, Shannon Summers, contributor and editor from menofscarletandgray.com. Allow me to introduce Chip Minnich, who is also a contributor and editor at menofscarlet.com. Chip, how are we doing today, and did you have a good New Year's?
I'm doing very well. I had a tremendous New Year's. I hope you did as well. And looking forward to talking about what a tremendous way to bring in a brand new year with a Fiesta Bowl victory over the Fighting Irish.
Yes, definitely. Anytime you beat the Golden Domers, it's going to be a good show. Like Chip just said, we're going to recap the Fiesta Bowl that was. We are going to discuss some of the departures from the Ohio State Buckeyes football team, early departures. We're also going to dab into a little bit of the coaching changes that we haven't talked about yet so far since they've taken place, and now that they're official, we could talk more about it. Fortunately, we don't have any Ask Motzag questions for the show, so for our next show, if you want to partake, don't forget hashtag Ask Motzag. Now, before we get into it, we want to remind you to download the free Buckeye Sports Radio's app on your iOS or Android device so you can enjoy our and other great shows on the channel wherever you go. And go follow the channel on Twitter at Buckeyes Radio.
I say goodbye to what we had. The good
Barrett in a shotgun. He's got Elliott to his right. Quick snap to Barrett. Barrett is going to hand it to Elliott. Punching it straight ahead goes Elliott. Touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott of Ohio State as the Buckeyes score on the opening drive of the game on a 2-yard run to take a 6-0 lead. First down, Ohio State at the Notre Dame 15. Barrett now sending Samuel in motion. Barrett gets the snap out of the shotgun. Throws where it's caught by Michael Thomas of the 5. Sticks it into the end zone for a touchdown. Michael Thomas as he came off the right flank and on a 15-yard pass, catch, and run. Ohio State. J.T. Barrett to Michael Thomas have a 2-touchdown lead over Notre Dame. First and goal at the 1 of Notre Dame. Barrett in the gun with a snap. Barrett, Elliott, end zone touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott on a 1-yard touchdown run, his second of the game. Ohio State's third touchdown of the afternoon, and they take a 20-7 lead over Notre Dame. Second and goal, Ohio State at the Irish 1. Barrett in the shotgun, the snap, hands it Elliott straight ahead. Elliott to the goal line, touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott, his third Ohio State rushing touchdown today. And the Buckeyes have a 27-7 lead. J.T. Barrett in the shotgun. Moving in motion, Braxton Miller, and Barrett's going to give it to Elliott, who cuts up the middle, gets the 40, to the 30 of Notre Dame, 20, 15, 10, 5, fourth touchdown of the day for Ezekiel Elliott on a 48-yard scamper to the house. Third down, Deshaun Kaiser from the 50-yard line gets the snap, drops to throw back at his own 40. Kaiser puts that ball in the air, and it's intercepted by Tyvis Powell, and he is tackled by Fuller at the 40-yard line, and that is at the Ohio State 40. Tyvis Powell had one taken away earlier, but he picks this one. First down at the Ohio State 38 for Notre Dame. Snap to Deshaun Kaiser. He looks to throw. Pressure coming. Hit. Football fumbled, and Ohio State's got it. Darren Lee knocked the ball away from Kaiser, but it was recovered by another Ohio State Buckeye who's covered up by Notre Dame players. And coming up with that football, Tracy Sprinkle, defensive lineman. Clock put in motion with 4 seconds to play. Snap comes from their own 27. Kaiser looking to throw. Cranks and fires, and an incomplete pass for Hunter as he was covered back there by Cameron Williams, and the game comes to an end with Ohio State defeating Notre Dame to win the Fiesta Bowl 44-28.
It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
Okay, I hope everybody's wiped the tears out of their eyes for, as I've been told, a moving little tribute to the best damn class in all of the land. The first Power 5 team to ever hit 50 wins is pretty special, and the game itself was pretty good except for a couple of minor things. I'll let you go ahead and start off, Chip. Give your recap.
As you said, congratulations to the outgoing senior class for 50 wins in 4 years. If somebody had said, I realize, we're looking forward and at Ohio State with the talent that is still there, and I think bright days are still ahead for Ohio State. But if somebody had said back in 2011, in the next 5 years, next 4 years, you're going to have a group that's going to win 50 games, people probably would have looked at you more than just a little bit kind of like that you're a little bit more than crazy. So if anything, that game, the win over Notre Dame, 44-28, in my estimation, probably wasn't as close as the final score actually was. But again, being an Ohio State podcast, maybe I'm a little biased. The biggest thing that I genuinely feel sorry for is the fact that two of the most prominent players in the game didn't really get to participate in it. At the very beginning of the first quarter, Notre Dame's Jalen Smith, who is the younger brother of former Ohio State running back Rod Smith, was injured. To this moment, and I'm not sure, Shannon, if you know more than I do, all I know is that after the game, Brian Kelly of Notre Dame referred to his injury as being significant, but I'm not sure in terms of if it's an ACL or I hope it's not that severe, but not entirely sure. We'll talk about it in greater detail. Joey Bosa was ejected in the first quarter for targeting. The game got off to a tremendous start. Ohio State, the offense was very versatile from the onset, involving Michael Thomas, Braxton Miller, Ezekiel Elliott, Marcus Baugh, who is going to be a prominent part of the 2016 Ohio State Buckeyes, had a big play. Jalen Marshall. Ohio State led 14-0 after the first quarter.
The way the game was going, the dominance that Joey Bosa was showing before the targeting call, I think they had 10 plays and 38 yards or something like that. The respect that he required by the players have to know where he was and the disruption he was causing, the openings that he was allowing for his teammates. It's just something that for the whole season, everybody just looks at Joey Bosa's stats and says, well, he didn't have a lot of sacks. And look, the guy was triple teamed, double teamed the whole season. Yes, his sacks were down, but his other teammates stepped up and got sacks because of what he was having to deal with. But like Chris Spielman was saying, how unique that he is with his hands, how quick he is, how strong he is, doesn't take a play off. Now, the targeting call, I kind of understand where they're coming from because he led with the crown of his head by putting his head down. But at the same time, he hit him in the chest. So it's kind of darn if you do, darn if you don't. I mean, what are your thoughts on that call?
Well, since you referenced Chris Spielman, I thought as an announcer, considering his Ohio State background, he didn't mince words. He's like, okay, you got to just move on, keep going with it. I personally understand the logic behind they're trying to protect the player. In this case, that would be Joey Bosa. The fact that, he hit him in the chest. And during the game, I said to my wife as we were watching it, I said, I just think the ejection of a player, and obviously I'm biased, I just think the ejection of a player from the game, I think is pretty severe. What I would hope is with the offseason, the American Football Coaches Association might reconsider the ejection rule. I think what would make sense to me would be maybe if a player was penalized for targeting, maybe like a 15-yard penalty, and the player has to leave for, I don't know, let's say the remainder of the quarter or something like that. And then if the player did it again in the same game, then an ejection. You see what I'm saying? Like, I understand the logic behind it. Just to kind of take it a little further, since we referenced Chris Spielman, he coaches a youth football camp, and after Ohio State won, he made a comment when he was asked about it that one of the things he tries to teach the young men that come to his football camp, parents of young men, is he always tells parents that when it comes to tackling, you want your head up, eyes up, wrap up. And Robert Smith, former Ohio State running back, something that I am familiar with in terms of seeing this, and something I've always heard is Robert Smith made the comment that in NFL locker rooms there have always been posters saying, hit what you see, meaning, that you got to have your head up in order to be making a appropriate tackle, that you're not putting your neck in jeopardy. So I was disappointed. What a way to end his career. But you're right. I mean, Joey Bosa was just wreaking havoc all over Notre Dame's offensive line, demanding, like you said, double team, triple teams throughout the season. I just felt it was very unfortunate. That's how his Ohio State career ended. But he was a dominant force before the targeting ejection took place.
Unfortunately, I agree that the call, as necessary as it was a good call because he did lower his head. Maybe take a play or quarter off, like you said, a 15-yard penalty. Now, if he went towards his head, then yeah, I can see the whole ejection. But as far as hitting him right in the chest, I think it was kind of a little overkill, but that's the way the rule reads, so you have to play within the rules. I know that if Adolphus Washington wouldn't have had his issues, if Bosa wouldn't have gotten the ejection, could you imagine the havoc that those two would have caused that whole game? I don't think Notre Dame would even have been able to move the ball or score. That's how dominant that defense has gotten.
I agree. And if there's a positive, you have to always try and find the positive in any difficult situation, is as soon as Joey Bosa was ejected and, Sam Hubbard was playing defensive end, Tyquan Lewis was playing defensive end, Michael Hill, Donovan Munger, the interior defensive line. In essence, that's kind of what the 2016 Ohio State defensive line is going to look. Now, granted, there are going to be players who were redshirted this year, players who are coming in this upcoming recruiting class. But if anything, kind of think of it from an Ohio State fan perspective, that kind of gave you a sneak preview as to what the 2016 Ohio State defensive line was going to look like.
Right. And you look at the positive about it, and a lot of the young players that might not have gotten a lot of playing time got a lot more game experience. So, I mean, it's a big positive for the Buckeyes moving forward, especially when they came off such a convincing win the way they did. Now, you had Ezekiel Elliott, who had, 3-4 touchdowns?
Correct. He had 4.
I mean, he was just wreaking havoc. J.T. Barrett had a great game. The offense looked great. I know we talked last week with Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone.net, and we were talking about having Ed Werner up in a box, and I think permanently we have to have Ed Werner in a box and allow him to make the play calls. I think we finally figured out the offense. I think next year it's going to be pretty interesting to see. Granted, we're losing a lot of key pieces, but also you're getting a lot of key pieces back. So it's going to be very interesting, and I think the ball has been taken out of Tim Beck's hands as far as the play calling.
I agree with you, and I want to give credit to Tony Gerdeman for something else that I realize we're going to be talking about the players who are departing in a little bit, but Tony had a tremendous article saying probably one of the most important players who is coming back, in this case, Pat Elflein, is going to be coming back. He's going to be sliding over from his guard position to play center. And the reason why I think that that's so important, I think, for Ohio State fans to kind of keep in mind is I'm just always been regardless of what style of offense, I've always been of the mindset that the game is won or lost in the trenches on the offensive or defensive side.
Oh, you're right.
And so the fact that you have, in this case, you have Pat Elflein going to center, and this, I think, is going to be, incidentally, something that will boost his stock tremendously as going into the 2016 season as well as for the 2017 NFL draft. But also Billy Price back at a guard position. Now, granted, Isaiah Prince he's going to probably play one of the tackle positions. Jamarco Jones right now is targeted for another tackle position. Out of the two, I think it would be fair to say that Prince has probably played a little bit more than Jamarco Jones, but I may be mistaken. That means one of the other interior guard positions is open. My point being that at least with Elflein and Price, you have two players right up the middle who are very strong, very capable, very competent at their positions, along with JT Barrett behind center. I feel a lot better than if Ohio State was going to be 4 players down. In this case, they're only down 3 players with a lot of inexperience along the offensive line.
You have inexperience as far as starting, but we also have seen some of the players rotating in and out. So there's a lot more experience than we're led to believe. I know when I wrote up my preview for the Notre Dame game, one of the biggest keys, and like you just hit on, the biggest key was going to be whoever's offensive line took control was going to pretty much win the game. That's pretty much a given. You just write that down for any preview and just roll with it. But really, that's what Urban Meyer's come to Ohio State and brought, especially if you look at the 2007 National Championship game. That Florida defensive line just annihilated Ohio State's offensive line, and that's why they walked away with such a big win. Now, you notice during the game that for a majority that Ohio State's offensive line was just kicking butt and taking names, and they were moving that ball up and down the field. But then you were seeing where they were getting the plays in late, slow down the tempo, and the offensive line wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and then they were stalling and everything. So I think going forward, the biggest key, and that's Urban Meyer's offense, is the tempo. And I think the offensive line thrives off of the tempo in order to hold the blocks, because obviously if they're having to sit back more trying to hold the blocks, they're not going to be as efficient as trying to get rid of the ball quicker and get up to the line and just get that momentum and everything going. Defensively, I think for the game, the Buckeyes, they looked phenomenal. I mean, they didn't give up a lot of big plays or anything, but Notre Dame was able to move the ball. I mean, they moved the ball a lot better with Joey Bosa out. I know at the beginning of the game, a lot of the players seemed to be missing some tackles, so I think that 38 yards would have been a lot less if they actually made some tackles before Bosa got out. But a lot of the guys, they stepped up. I mean, Tyvis Powell had a interception. Eli Apple was pretty much shutting down Fuller, even though I think he had over 100 yards still. But he only had that one big play where I think Conley was going for the ball and got beat. And that was like, an 80-yard play. So I think all in all that the defense played pretty good. What were your thoughts on the defense?
I agree that I think the defense played very well. Going back to, you mentioned, Gary and Conley, he was on coverage. He had, I don't want to say a bad game. He had a challenging game. As you said, Eli Apple did a tremendous job throughout most of the game. I think, obviously Tyvis Powell with the interception. At the tail end of the game, what sealed the victory for Ohio State, Darren Lee had a sack that caused a fumble. Ohio State recovered it. Ohio State was able to run out the clock. By and large, the defense, I thought, played very well. I thought, going back to something that Tony Gerdeman said last week on the podcast, and as soon as it happened, I immediately thought of Tony and our podcast, was that he said, I could just imagine the Ohio State fans and faithful getting upset if there's a long touchdown, and you referenced Will Fuller had an 81-yard touchdown. Like you said, Gary and Conley, if he was going for the ball or just played it, poor technique or coverage, whatever it might be. But I never ever felt like, okay, Notre Dame is coming back and Ohio State's not in control of this game. If anything, as you said, I think the defense did its part in terms of maybe not as dominant of pressure as it would have been had Joey Bosa stayed in the game, but late in the game, Sam Hubbard and Tyquan Lewis on consecutive plays had sacks. So the defensive line, that might be something that, all right, maybe they're going to be missing a dominant player like Joey Bosa in 2016, but I'm not as concerned about the defensive line, as much as I was going into the Fiesta Bowl, especially being down Adolphus Washington and Joey Bosa. Going back to something that you had mentioned about Ed Warner, I thought of this and being up in the booth. And I'm all in favor of Ed Warner being up in the booth. Something that Coach Meyer mentioned prior to the bowl game was that, well, this is only possible with an experienced line. And I already mentioned how, all right, they're going to be missing some experienced players. I think one of the key elements of Ohio State's spring and summer is going to be the involvement of former Ohio State offensive lineman and current graduate assistant Jim Cordell, who is on the sideline, who has kind of taken the place of Ed Warner being the coach, dictating and coaching on the sidelines. If Ed Warner does stay up in the booth, which I agree with, and I hope that stays the course, then Jim Cordell will have to be a prominent part of the offensive line going forward in 2016 in terms of coaching responsibilities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know when he said it last week, it kind of really showed up this week in the game, and I was kind of impressed, and I think that the future looks definitely bright for Ohio State in that regard. As far as I know, I believe JT Barrett won the Offensive Player of the Game, and Eli Apple won Defensive Player of the Game. I believe Eli Apple definitely deserved it. Actually, the whole defense kind of, pretty much deserved it. It's kind of hard to pick out a defensive player. It was really hard to pick out a defensive player and an offensive player. I think Ezekiel Elliott, it could have went to Zeke or it could have went to JT. I mean, Zeke had 149 yards and 4 touchdowns, so just I feel bad for Zeke finishing off his career. Feels like he's got snubbed for everything almost, but last year he walked out with all the hardware. So
I was kind of surprised. I thought Zeke scoring the 4 touchdowns and tying the Fiesta Bowl record I'm not saying I was shocked, but I just thought that Zeke was going to be the player of the game. But he had a tremendous career. He had I think if somebody had asked Ezekiel Elliott, do you want another trophy or do you want a Fiesta Bowl victory? I think not just 99 times out of 100, but 100 times out of 100, he's going to say he wants that Fiesta Bowl win. So I think that was good enough for him. Plus, he kind of held Coach Meyer captive while the Cardale Jones and the other seniors dumped the victory Gatorade over Coach Meyer. So I guess he could kind of consider himself happy to be an accomplice in that feat.
Yeah, he got his swim move one last time. So
yeah, and who would have guessed that Sean Dernberger was going to kick 3 field goals?
Yeah, as far as the special teams with the field goals, the way that it's been going pretty much all year, it was nice to see him go 3 for 3 on the field goals. So yeah, our future looks bright with that.
Yeah, the only thing that I don't want to say it's a concern, but something that I would definitely like to look at this spring from the field goal side of things with Sean Dernberger is better distance in terms of, I think that they showed a stat, or perhaps I read it on Twitter, that Ohio State had not attempted a field goal longer than 40 yards this season. So next year, you never know. That might be something, depending on with all the departures on offense, that might be something that Ohio State may need to do in terms of scoring points. So hopefully that'll be something they can build upon, the positive 3 for 3, like you said, in the Fiesta Bowl.
Speaking of the spring game, 3 months away.
And the date is April 16th.
Yep.
Mark it down in your calendars.
As soon as tickets go on sale, I will be grabbing a bunch and we will be going again. It's a tradition. You are listening to Men in the Scarlet and Gray here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V Sporto channel. Okay, we're going to discuss a little bit about the Buckeyes coaching changes, some of the Buckeye players that are leaving, any surprises. I know it seems every day we've got news of players that are declaring early and leaving, and they're putting aside the Scarlet and Gray in order to go for the big money of the NFL. And hey, you got the talent, you got the option, and you go after the money. I mean, I'm not going to stand in front of anybody's way. That's, if I was in their position, I'd probably be doing the same thing. I mean, I'm sitting there trying to buck on Twitter in order to be able to be the Browns' next head coach because I can't do any worse and I could get paid a heck of a lot less. Is there any surprises from the players that are leaving early that are declaring for you?
The only one that comes somewhat of a surprise is, and I mean this just in the sense that I'm not sure how high he will be picked, is Tyvis Powell. Now, keep in mind that I have nothing but the highest regard for Tyvis Powell. In his Twitter statement that he posted, thanking Ohio State fans and the coaches and the players and everything when he left, he already has his degree, and I believe it was a prominent Bucknuts.com contributor, Jay Book, who I follow on Twitter. I believe he may have said something to the effect that a lot of Ohio State fans, and I wasn't aware of this, that Tyvis Powell has battled a lot of injuries in terms, throughout his career that Ohio State fans just were not aware of. I certainly wasn't. And he just kind of probably toughed it out and kept going. So in his mind, he probably thinks, all right, I'd rather, get paid for this. But yeah, that's the only one that is, if you want to label it as a surprise, when the rumors and scuttlebutt started about, Tyvis Powell might be going, I thought, really? But, when you start, like you said, the opportunity to earn money, to get paid to play the game that they love and that they do well at, I am not going to take shots at anyone for making that decision.
Oh, I'm not either. I mean, I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised by Marshall. I don't know what kind of grade he got back. Obviously, it was good enough for him to go. I think he's got the talent, but I think he needs one more year of seasoning because of some of the mistakes he makes. But that's just my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, we're just doing a podcast and we're not involved with the NFL or anything. But, I mean, I wish nothing but the best for them. I mean, we've got Joey Bosa leaving early, Ezekiel Elliott, Cardell Jones, Michael Thomas has announced, Eli Apple has announced, Jalen Marshall has announced. I think we're still waiting on Vonn Bell, but I think that's just a matter of time from what he was saying.
Getting back to Jalen Marshall, I don't want to say that he's not a good student, but a lot of what I've heard from other people that follow Ohio State football like you and I do is that school, I'm not saying that he doesn't do well in school, but that he, by and large, kind of what I said earlier, that the opportunity to get paid to play football is of greater interest to him at this time. And I guess since you mentioned it was kind of a surprise, what I've heard is more than likely Jalen Marshall will probably be a day 3 pick, and that means rounds 4 through 7. Now, that's not the money is not nearly as great as what's going to be awaiting Joey Bosa, for example, but it's still good enough. It's more than, what the typical college student makes, their first job out of college. And I think Jalen Marshall has a tremendous opportunity to impress people at the combine. Hopefully he'll work out. That would be my advice to Jalen Marshall, is considering he's primarily looked at as a return specialist in terms of kickoffs and punts. And yeah, he's was used a lot on jet sweeps and things of that nature within the Ohio State offense. He really didn't do a lot of kind of route running that a lot of other wide receivers have, like Michael Thomas, for example. Like Michael Thomas is certainly a lot more polished as a wide receiver than Jalen Marshall. So I agree with you that, yeah, maybe another year would have served Jalen Marshall better in terms of his wide receiver development. But I certainly, going back to it, the threat of injury and the opportunity to make money to get paid at a game that they love to play, I'm certainly not going to question it.
No, I agree. And there is that fear of the injury where, you don't know. But also, if you get injured, hey, there's also a team that's always willing to draft injured players, and that's Cleveland. So you can always go there and make some money.
Talking about this earlier with my friend Tim, who's a coworker and loyal listener of the podcast. And, we both kind of just shook our heads and kind of grimaced when we thought about a few years ago, Marcus Lattimore of South Carolina, like how dramatically different his NFL career never happened because of that catastrophic knee injury he sustained in South Carolina. Now, granted, one can hope that he has his degree, and I believe that he is now on Will Muschamp's staff at South Carolina. But the point being that football is a violent game. Things can happen so dramatically different in an instant. We referenced earlier Jalen Smith of Notre Dame. Hopefully that is not an injury that is going to truly knock him far down off on NFL draft boards. But yeah, I have nothing but highest praise and admiration for all of the players that you referenced that are leaving early. They helped contribute immensely to a national championship last year. Nothing but fond memories of that season, as well as all of their contributions to Ohio State throughout their Ohio State careers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Definitely don't fault anybody. I do want to say, for any player that happens to listen to our podcast, thank you for everything that you've done while you've worn the Scarlet and Gray, no matter what. As far as unfortunate situations like suspensions or just stupid stuff where other teams are saying that it's a dirty program and this and that. You're a Buckeye. You're always going to be a Buckeye unless you wear the Steelers colors. I'm still going to root for you.
Yeah, well, don't be surprised. We lament this as Browns fans. Is how is it that Pittsburgh, which now granted it's not that much further away from Columbus, how is it that the Steelers can come in and find players to contribute seemingly every year, and the Cleveland Browns cannot?
Well, and it always seems that the Browns, for some reason, I haven't figured this out, and it's not just one regime, but multiple regimes. They look at Ohio State and they have that bias of being overrated, but then you have the Pittsburgh Steelers who are drafting them, and they seem to be having winning records, and it's kind of strange. So I think someone needs to change your philosophy. I know a lot of these players, and I was talking to somebody, we're talking about as far as their draft stock and everything. It's kind of strange that I know a lot of players are going to come back being in the first and second round, but there's only 64 spots open for that. And you have how many Buckeyes coming out, and then you have how many other players that are just as talented or a little bit better across the nation fitting teams' needs. So I think a lot of players it is what it is. I just want to say thank you for what you've contributed to Buckeye Nation. You've made it a great run, a magical run, and something that we're not going to forget.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Now, moving on, it's official now. Before it was announced and the coaches and everything talked about it, so we knew it was coming, but now it is officially official because Chris Ash is no longer with the Buckeyes, even though he secured a commitment from a Brooklyn player for Ohio State, and then he's going over to Rutgers, which that's, part of his recruiting territory. But Chris Ash taking over the head coaching position at Rutgers, which I think is a great, great pickup for Rutgers. It's probably just, my bias because of what he's done for the last 2 years. And I thought it was a great move when he was brought on board 2 years ago, stealing him away from our friend Bert. But then we go and get Greg Schiano, who has been out of the coaching circuit for the last 2 years. He last coached in the NFL with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At first, when I first heard about it, I kind of was, iffy based on the simple fact of his reputation and the way things were left in Tampa Bay, and you don't know what's true and what's not true, so it's kind of wrong to have that kind of opinion. But he's an excellent recruiter. He brought and put Rutgers on the map. He's the first coach in a while to put him on the map, and since he's been gone, they haven't been anywhere. And if you look at his defensive philosophy, which, hold on, let me pull up here. his defensive philosophy starts with stop the run, limit the big plays, and create takeaways. Now, that's pretty much the same exact thing that that Chris Ash has done, but the way they've done it is kind of in reverse. I know that with Chris Ash, he stops the pass first and then works to stop the run, but whatever works. I know that there's a bunch of there's more things involved with Schiano's defense, and I think he's going to bring with him and Luke Fickell, I think that's going to be a very dominant defense. And with the changeover for this next year, they're going to obviously take some bumps, but I think by the second year minimum that they're going to be one of the top defenses in the country.
Yeah, looking at Greg Schiano's track record in terms of his coaching career that kind of preceded his time in the NFL, he was a graduate assistant at Rutgers, then at Penn State, and then he had actually moved on to become an assistant, the defensive back coach from 1991 to 1995, and then he had 3 years with the Chicago Bears, and then he was a defensive coordinator for the Miami Hurricanes in 1999 and 2000. Now, I realize, that's 16 years ago, but keep in mind, a lot of the great players that played during that time, during the latter 90s, he was kind of involved with, working on what was arguably one of the most talented teams ever in terms of players that eventually went on from college to the pros. And as you said, going to Rutgers, he built Rutgers from the ground up. Rutgers was, to call it a laughingstock would be an understatement of immense proportions. He essentially took what was nothing and built it slowly and gradually, starting in 2001. Now, again, 10 years ago, but in 2006, for a brief time, Rutgers was undefeated, was flirting with even possibility of, Rutgers possibly playing Ohio State, because that was when Ohio State was contending for the national championship that year. They didn't wind up staying at that high level, but, he had Rutgers in a very competitive place. He actually interviewed for the position up in Ann Arbor after Lloyd Carr had stepped down and had accepted the position, but then he changed his mind. You wonder, what would have been like if he had taken that position instead of staying at Rutgers and then eventually going on to the NFL. But I think he is going to be not only a very sound defensive coach in terms of the way Ohio State approaches defense in the absence of Chris Ash and his move on to Rutgers, but I think he's also going to be a sounding board for Urban Meyer in the sense that being comparable in age in terms of comparable of experience, being able to, Urban Meyer, things that he wants to do, I think being that sounding board, that might be something that maybe Urban Meyer has missed with losing, such a trusted assistant like Tom Herman last year to Houston, losing Chris Ash, obviously, to this promotion to Rutgers. Maybe that's something that Greg Schiano can offer Ohio State and Urban Meyer as being kind of a trusted advisor. And as far as Chris Ash goes, I completely agree. I think he came in at a time when Ohio State's defense was not nearly as stout as he helped to make it. I think he is going to do a very solid job for Rutgers. I'm going to be interested to see how he takes some of the philosophies that he has about offense, because from what I understand, he has hired one of Tom Herman's graduate assistants, I believe, or maybe an offensive assistant. I'm not entirely sure.
I think it's a grad assistant. I think you're exactly right.
To run Rutgers offense. So that means there's going to be elements of an Urban Meyer, Tom Herman type spread, or at least I would anticipate. A number of graduate assistants and interns at Ohio State are going with Chris Ash to become members of the Rutgers staff. I saw something the other day that a longtime, well-respected New Jersey high school coach has now been brought on by Chris Ash. So I'm going to be anxious to see how he actually melds a lot of these individuals into his first staff. I think if I was a Rutgers fan, I would be looking forward to this coming spring and this fall great anticipation because Chris Ash, I say what you will about how the offense turns out, because it's obviously going to be a transition and a work in progress. But I anticipate Rutgers being very sound defensively. I'm not saying necessarily dominant, but very sound, just as that was kind of his trademark wherever he was. Keep in mind, think back to when Chris Ash was at Wisconsin, and it's scary to think about, as time flies, it'll be 4 years from the 2012 season that Ohio State, they had their hands full going up to Wisconsin. Now, granted, it's always a tough place to play, but Chris Ash was the defensive coordinator, giving Tom Herman all kinds of fits. And Ohio State was very fortunate to get out of Wisconsin with the win in overtime. But my point being that, Chris Ash, I think he's going to do a solid job. I think he just needs to do whatever he can to hold on to whatever kind of commitments that were there before the coaching change, secure whatever commitments he can possibly get for the remainder of this recruiting class that will sign at the beginning of February, and do whatever he can to keep a lot of that excellent talent in New Jersey home to play for the Scarlet Knights. Ohio State is playing Rutgers at home on October 1st. So that should be, I don't want to call it a homecoming game for Chris Ash, but that should be interesting considering, like, as we've been talking about, Greg Schiano, former Rutgers coach on Ohio State staff, and Chris Ash, former Ohio State assistant, coming in with a Rutgers team to play the Buckeyes in Ohio Stadium on October 1st.
Yeah, I definitely want to get tickets for that and maybe share some, sit with our friend from Rutgers. Sal wants to come up, or Jerry, I believe one of those two maybe both want to come up and enjoy the game. It'd be kind of fun. Return a favor for going down to Rutgers this last year. I know Eric LeGrand, I believe I heard him on his show saying that he was wanting to come up for that game, and he was hoping that Coach Schiano would give him a box. So we'll see how that works out. It'd be nice to have somebody like Eric in the inside the shoe experience, what the shoe's about, and just his story and everything is kind of magical in that regard. You are listening to Men in the Scarlet and Gray here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V Sporto channel.
Here they come, yo. Here they come.
One's a riverboat gambler, picking with his gut. The other is cold, calculating, which makes Vegas nervous. Now it's time for Motsag's Pickup. Who are you going to ride with?
All right, let's give our final predictions, our final Motsag Pick'ems for the final game of the season, the national championship game, which is going to be January 11th, Alabama against Clemson. I'll let you go ahead and go first with your thoughts on it.
Well, I have to say that last week I was hoping for Michigan State to win, but if you recall, I picked Alabama. Never did I anticipate Alabama dominating Michigan State the way that they did. I am pleased that Clemson, because I work with a coworker, is a real big Clemson fan. Happy for my coworker. His name is Ed. He's beyond excited that Clemson has made it to the national championship game. I'm certainly hoping, I think just like about every other Ohio State fan, is rooting against Alabama. So I'm hoping for Clemson to do it. I just don't see how Clemson, I think the world of Deshaun Watson. I think he's a tremendous competitor. He's a dynamic threat throwing and running the ball. And I know that in the past, Clemson, the type of offense that they run has given Alabama fits, but I think defensively Alabama is too strong. I think Alabama will win.
I'm kind of at a loss here because, first of all, naturally, every team that I've picked pretty much isn't going the way it's going. So I'm just going to pick Alabama just based on the simple fact of hopefully I'm wrong again. But no, in all honesty, Clemson, they looked good against Oklahoma. They looked really, their defense was really dominant. I know early in the season, Joe Dexter and I was talking about Clemson, and we've always had the joke that we're waiting for Clemson to do their Clemsoning and not show up for the game. I think they are focused. Obviously, by the way, the Alabama-Michigan State game, Alabama's focused this time. I know it's easy to sit here and say, as far as the way the playoffs went, did they get it right? Did they not get it right? But bottom line, we know that conference championships and all that stuff plays into it. I kind of liked what Tony was saying last week about if they do expand it, having your 5 conference champions and then having 3 other, maybe essentially wild card, maybe a group of 5 team if they're ranked up there, and 2 Power 5 wild cards basically, depending on their records. It's easy to sit here and say, out of all the bowl games and everything that were played, that Ohio State, Stanford, Alabama, and Clemson should have been the 4 teams. But since it is Clemson and it is Alabama, and they both pretty much look dominant in their games, I know the way Alabama runs their offense is going to be kind of a struggle against Clemson in a sense. It's not going to be – they're not going to be able to throw the ball that easily maybe. We've always said it's always come down to the trenches and who's got the better lines. No, Alabama's got some really good line and everything, but so does Clemson. Part of me wants to go with Clemson. I think I'm hoping it's going to be a better game than a lot of the other bowl games that we've seen, but I'm going to go with Alabama, just hopefully that my reverse psychology works on it. Well, folks, that's going to bring an end to this fine edition of Men in the Scarlet and Gray podcast. It's not going to bring an end to our football podcasts. We're still going to have recruiting shows here and there, and Chip and I are still going to be doing shows. So don't think that we're done with talking about football. I mean, this is Ohio State. We want to thank our listeners for everything that they've done and keep everything going. I know working on doing a wrestling podcast, got to get back on the ball with the basketball. Basketball team's looking a lot better. Maybe doing some baseball and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff we can talk about with Ohio State and everything. If any of our listeners, they have any questions for any sports and they want to talk to us, football, basketball, whatever it is, go ahead and hit the hashtag at AskMotsag, or you can email us at motsag@motsag.com. Always love talking with you guys, and definitely love to expand more and get more listeners, and love what everybody's done, helping us grow, and hopefully we'll just keep growing and everybody's enjoying what we're doing and bringing to the table. You can listen and subscribe to our show on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and of course Buckeye Sports Radio. Don't forget to follow them on Twitter at Buckeyes Radio. Chip, why don't you tell people where they can find your work and your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is at Chip Minnich, Minnich, and I can be found on menofthescarletandgray.com. I'm also a contributor for athlonsports.com for college football, and I have a personal blog from themindofminnick.blogspot.com. As Shannon mentioned, we talked about the Cleveland Browns, so don't be surprised if you go over to my personal blog if you see some occasional rants and ravings about what the Browns are doing or what they should be doing or why aren't they doing this on my personal blog at this time of the year. But yeah, anxious, and as Shannon said, so appreciative for all of the comments and all of the suggestions about what the show should be, the podcast should be. So as Shannon, don't be shy with that hashtag AskMotsag.
Oh, I definitely agree. You can follow me on Twitter at SMSummers84. That's at SMSOMMERS84. You can catch my work on menofscarletandgray.com. I'm starting to know it's been a long process, and I really have to get buckled down, and I'm starting a new site called BurningRiverChronicles.com. It's going to be covering some Ohio State. It's going to mostly focus on a lot of Northeast Ohio sports, especially professional and everything. And maybe start getting some podcasts going on there, and Chip and I can get together and talk about some Browns and stuff and the Moneyball direction that they seem to be going. But, I mean, we definitely enjoy everything you guys have done. Definitely love Buckeye Nation. It's one of the greatest things and makes it so enjoyable. You can't even explain. I mean, I know spring game last year, so many people that I met, and hopefully this next year get to meet a lot more people and get more word out and just enjoy it. I mean, we just love our our loyal listeners and everything that they've done for us, like Rays Fan Geo, OSU Girl 47, Buckeye Radio, Buckeye Claire. I mean, the list just keeps going on and on. There's so many to thank. Those are just the ones that are on the top of my head. So just definitely appreciate everything that you guys have done. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Motseg Podcast, or you can like us on Facebook. For Chip Minnich, I'm Shannon Summers. Thank you for listening to Men in Scarlet and Gray podcast here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V Sporto channel. Talk to you guys all next week. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.